When you hear talk of the voices in someone's head, you probably think of Ray Kinsella building his field of dreams, or some other movie character, schizophrenic, blaming a murder on the voices in their head.
There's an unfortunate stereotype of the person with schizophrenia hearing commanding voices telling them to do things, and sometimes nasty, unpleasant, dangerous things. Those occasions are the minority. The reality does not match up at all with the stereotype.
That's Dr. Charles Fernyhough, a professor of psychology at Durham University and author of the book The Voices Within: The History and Science of How We Talk to Ourselves.
A recent study of mentions of voice hearing in US media outlets showed that roughly half the time hearing voices was mentioned, it was mentioned in connection with violence. The reality doesn't fit that. People who hear voices sometimes hear commanding voices. Most of the time they're able to resist the commanding voices. They're able to say, no, actually, I'm not going to do that thing. So there's a terrible problem of stigma, and what we're trying to do in our research, as well as find out more about how these experiences happen, is to try and reduce that stigma, to try and change people's understanding of hearing voices, to see it as a part of human experience which has been around for centuries, which crosses continents and cultures, which has all sorts of different meanings, both positive and negative, and it just needs to be understood better in its amazing variety.
Fernyhough says that these cultural fears of the voices in our head are largely misguided. In fact, an internal voice can be quite helpful. It is these more positive, productive voices that he hopes people can focus on more in the future. And those voices are something many of us are already familiar with.
When I was growing up, people used to say talking to yourself is the first sign of madness. I don't think they say that nearly as much now, and I'm very glad to hear it, because whenever I give talks, I ask people, do you ever talk to yourself out loud? And most people, adults in the audience, put their hands up. It's a very common thing for us to do as adults.
Fernyhough says it's important for us to differentiate between talking to yourself, even silently, and what we consider thoughts. Though they seem like the same thing, there are some small but important differences.
Thinking is quite a vague term. Thinking encompasses pretty much everything that the conscious mind does. And I think what's useful about focusing on inner speech, it allows us to be a bit more specific about a kind of thinking, and that is the thinking that we do in words. So, yeah, inner speech is a kind of thinking, but it's a specific one that seems to make use of language in different ways.
Fernyhough says it's important to establish that there's no real right way to talk to yourself.
I've worked with a variety of different people using very detailed methods of describing inner experience. And you do come across people who use inner speech very, very little. It's no problem. People have all sorts of different ways of getting to where they need to be, of doing the thinking that they need to do. And some people think much more visually. Some people can do the whole thing using visual images, for example.
No matter how we communicate with ourselves, what's important is that most of us do it. So for those who are doing it, what is its value?
It involves becoming aware of the stream of thoughts that are flowing through your mind as they relate to whatever is going on in any given situation. And one of the things that we find is that when people are in situations that require some kind of intervention, so they're experiencing certain kinds of negative emotions, if you will, it can often be helpful to talk oneself through those situations. Doing that can have some value. And one of the things that we try to look at is how can you talk to yourself most productively?
That's Dr. Ethan Cross, a professor of psychology at the University of Michigan.
When we started talking about this amongst ourselves, my students and I, lots of anecdotes kept coming up about people literally trying to talk themselves through their problems, almost like they were talking to someone else. Doing this silently, not necessarily out loud, but in their heads. So it got us thinking about what function might self-talk play in helping people think, feel, and behave better when under stress.
To figure out the answer to this question, Cross thought about the big difference of how we can talk to ourselves. As it turns out, it really comes down to a matter of perspective.
The way we typically talk to ourselves is in the first person. When we reflect on our lives, we think about, what am I feeling right now? But what we also know is that it's relatively easy for people to also think about themselves using their own name or other non-first person pronouns. So how am I feeling right now? Or what are you feeling? And what we find is that whether people engage in the first person version of that, what we call first person self-talk, or non-first person or distant self-talk, can have really important implications for how people respond to stress.
To examine his idea that a simple shift in point of view can yield a big difference, Cross brought test subjects into a lab and split them into two groups. The first group was told they would be giving a speech about what makes them qualified for their dream job, and that they should prepare for the speech by thinking of themselves only in the first person. The second group was told to prepare for the same speech exclusively in the third person.
So in one case, people are asking, why am I feeling this way? And in the other case, they're asking, they're plugging their name in there, feeling this way. We have them do that for a few minutes, and then we take them down the hall to another room where seated in front of them are a panel of Confederates. These are people who are essentially in on the experiment. They're part of the research team, and they're sitting there, and they're designed to provide really stoic, borderline disapproving facial feedback as the participant is then instructed to give their speech. So they give this speech that they've prepared to this panel of Confederates, and what we do is we videotape their behavior. And when the experiment was over, we had judges evaluate participants' performance. We had them rate them on how persuasive they were. And what we find is that participants who used their name actually delivered more persuasive speeches. They also reported after delivering the speech that they were less shamed and embarrassed, and they spent less time ruminating about how they did.
Cross says that ultimately the big takeaway from his studies is pretty simple for him to lay out.
These simple linguistic shifts from I to your name have implications for how people think, feel, and behave under stress. And colleagues of ours have since taken some of those findings and paradigms and extended them in a variety of interesting ways, showing compatible effects in other performance contexts.
There's just one problem, and Cross says there's no point in beating around the bush. Even if it's helpful, who wants to talk about themselves in the third person?
The caveat to all of this is it's, of course, a little strange when you talk out loud about yourself in the third person. In our work, we ask people to reflect on their lives silently in the first person or third person. And I think this is a really important distinction because although it's possible that talking out loud about yourself in the third person may have some benefits in the sense of helping you deal more effectively with stress and emotion, there's also a social cost that's linked with engaging in that behavior. We don't typically go around talking about ourselves to others using our name. And I think when you do that, it violates all sorts of social conventions that can be problematic in lots of ways. Drawing a distinction between silent, distant self-talk, if you will, and self-talk that happens out loud is really, I think, an important thing to do.
To investigate self-talk further, check out Dr. Charles Fernyho's new book, The Voices Within. You can find more information about all of our guests by visiting our site at viewpointsonline.net. You can follow us on Twitter at Viewpoints Radio. Our show is written and produced by Evan Rook and Pat Reuter. Our executive producer is Reed Pence. I'm Marty Peterson.
Viewpoints returns in just a moment.
The burden of Alzheimer's disease on the nation's families and economy is growing rapidly. The Alzheimer's Association 2019 Alzheimer's Disease Facts and Figures Report finds that an estimated 5.8 million Americans are living with Alzheimer's dementia, and 1 in 3 seniors will die from it. More than 16 million Americans are caring for a person with the disease. Dr. Keith Fargo is Director of Scientific Programs and Outreach at the Alzheimer's Association.
Alzheimer's is now the 6th leading cause of death in the U.S., and by 2050, the number of Americans with Alzheimer's is going to climb to almost 14 million. This burden to the country and to families is unsustainable, and it's critical that we continue to invest in Alzheimer's research to reverse this trend.
Fargo says in 2019, Alzheimer's disease will cost the country $290 billion. And without scientific advancements, that figure will top $1 trillion by mid-century. Learn more about the impact of Alzheimer's disease at alz.org.
Trying to sell your old car? Instead, donate your vehicle to Heritage for the Blind. Pickup is free and your donation is tax-deductible. Just call 1-800-835-1478. Heritage for the Blind accepts cars, vans, trucks, and boats, whether they run or not. Donate your vehicle and you'll receive a free 3-day vacation voucher to over 50 locations. Call 1-800-835-1478. That's 1-800-835-1478.
If you or someone you know is struggling with addiction, please call this toll-free number right now, 800-279-0419. That's 800-279-0419. By calling your addiction team, you're taking the first steps to recovery. Don't fight addiction alone. Their advisors are ready to take your call. Your future is still a bright place. The help you need could be one call away. 800-279-0419. That's 800-279-0419. This call is completely confidential, and if you have private insurance, there could be little to no cost to you. Even if you've already been to treatment, give us a call. There's no need to let addiction ruin your life. Take the first step now. Call your addiction team at 800-279-0419. That's 800-279-0419. Make the free call now. 800-279-0419. Your addiction team is a third-party advertiser for various treatment centers and placement networks. Individual results will vary. Visit youraddictionteam.com/terms for more information.
And that's Viewpoints for this week. Viewpoints is a production of MediaTrax Communications. You can follow us on Twitter and Facebook to learn about upcoming shows and find a library of past programs on iTunes. Plus, you'll always find podcasts of our segments and information about our guests at viewpointsonline.net. Join us again next week for your public affairs magazine, Viewpoints.